Hello there, students, and welcome to this video on the Industrial Revolution, where today we're going to be looking at the factory system and reading through some primary source documents to see just what it was like to work in a factory in Britain during the Industrial Revolution. That being said, everybody, you guys need access to the primary sources we're going to be reading together in this screencasted lecture. And the document that contains all the stuff we're reading here today is entitled The Industrial Revolution, Thales Key Text. And that's what those little letters there, TKT or ticket, stand for. Now, this has been shared with you guys via an assignment module in Canvas already. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can turn in this assignment via Canvas. You could download the PDF, upload that PDF into PDF Expert, and complete it on your iPad. You are also welcome to print out a copy of this particular document here and complete it just on paper. Then you can take a photo of your completed answers and upload those into Canvas. You can also complete it on, say, loose leaf paper or in your notebook, take a photo of your answers and then upload it back into Canvas. And if you get really desperate, you're also welcome just to make a copy of the Google Docs document that is also shared with you guys and complete it as a Google Docs document and then turn in the URL link into Canvas. Make sure that it's shared with me so that I can view it, but there's a number of different ways that you can turn in the assignment, but it just has to be turned in via Canvas. And please email me if you guys run into any trouble and we can try to troubleshoot it. All right. All right, just by way of reminder, before the Industrial Revolution, the making of goods is taking place on an individual and very local level. For instance, you have guilds, right? Those clubs that were dedicated to the production of a particular good, and the putting out system where you might have raw materials like wool being given in a huge heap to a peasant family, and they would do the spinning and the weaving of that raw material, that raw wool, into finished cloth. Remember that the vast majority of people lived in the countryside, and during the Industrial Revolution, they're going to begin moving to the cities looking for work. The major trades are organized as guilds, which are those clubs that are dedicated to the production of a particular good. And if you wanted to become, say, a shoemaker or a sewer or a dyer or just engaged in one of these areas of production, you would have to serve a pretty lengthy apprenticeship. Transportation is limited by foot or by horse or by carriage or by ship, and trade changes slowly over the centuries. And during this time, work and the production of goods is done without any real concern for cost or efficiency. If you look at this nice fellow right here, he is making shoes. And really, for a master craftsman as he is, the making of a particular pair of shoes here is kind of a work of art. Our word masterpiece comes from the final shoe, the final barrel that a master craftsman would have to produce if he were to become a master. This is a work of art right here. The cost is not really considered because you're making this pair of shoes for somebody who's very wealthy and can afford it. And efficiency is not really there because, again, it's more like a work of art than it is a wearable, usable piece of clothing. Here's some pictures, everybody, of the Industrial Revolution in factories. As you can see here, the factory is itself a standalone building. It's a huge building. See the giant smokestacks here with the smoke curling upwards towards the sky. And you can see just this long row of what I imagine are just machine after machine after machine. You can see here, too, that this particular factory is located on, you guessed it, a river. Maybe not so much for water power. These smokestacks here, they're probably burning coal to power this particular factory here, but you still want to be near a river so that you can quickly and easily load and unload supplies that you need for your factory. As you can see in a lot of these photos here, it's just machine after machine after machine. That's why you need such a huge building here entirely dedicated to the production of some particular good. Miles and miles of spun cloth or some other valuable commodity. You can see here even more of these machines here being made to churn out some particular good. And I think probably the most harrowing aspect of the Industrial Revolution is evident here in this photo and in this photo here. Because, one, you've got grinding poverty during the Industrial Revolution, and you have these machines with very complicated parts. Sometimes it's very hard if you're an adult and you have some large hands to get in there and fix these machines when they break down. These factory owners are hiring children as young as 6 years old. So these kids are not earning like a full, not earning as much as, say, an adult. They are subject to pretty difficult working conditions. The factories, the machines themselves can be quite dangerous, and they're constantly spewing out cotton and wool fibers into the air. These kids are breathing that in. They're Unless they can work very, very hard and educate themselves outside of the school day, it's going to be really hard for these kids to ever escape this life of factory labor. So the child labor during the Industrial Revolution, I think, is probably the most upsetting part of the massive changes that are taking place here in England. All right, let's go ahead and get into some of our documents here. So the first one we'll look at is Adam Smith from his 1776 work, The Wealth of Nations, and we're looking at the division of labor. Remember, you need to be writing down the answers to these questions. You can either do that through this lecture, or you can pause the lecture and write down the questions yourself. And that way you can have this to turn in by the time the lecture's over. And since Adam Smith is from Edinburgh, I'll try to say this in as good a Scottish accent as I can muster. I have seen a small factory of this kind where 10 men only were employed, and where some of them consequently performed 2 or 3 distinct operations. But though they were very poor, and therefore but indifferently accommodated with the necessary machinery, they could, when they exerted themselves, make among them about 12 pounds of pins in a day. There are in a pound upwards of 4,000 pins of a middling size. Those 10 persons, therefore, could make among them upwards of 48,000 pins in a day. Each person, therefore, making a 10th part of 48,000 pins, might be considered as making 4,800 pins in a day. But if they had all wrought separately and independently, and without any of them having been educated to this particular business, they certainly could not each of them have made 20, perhaps not 1 pin in a day. That is certainly not the 240th, perhaps not the 4,800 part of what they are at present capable of performing, and consequent of a proper division and combination of their different operations. Now, my Scottish accent broke off a couple of points during the reading of this particular text here, so I apologize for that. I tried. When you're reading a particular book, it's really helpful to have an idea of what kind of genre that book is, and that way you can get a sense of what the author is trying to accomplish. The Wealth of Nations is an economics book. It's an economics textbook, as it were. And Adam Smith has an argument, i.e., the benefit of free trade, the benefit of what is here called the division of labor. But in this particular sample here, the way that he argues that the division of labor is very helpful and very beneficial and good for societies that adopt dividing up a complicated task like making a pin into less complicated individual steps is just by describing it. I'll repeat that. What he does here to support the idea that the division of labor is a positive benefit for society is just by describing it. So, for instance, the first question here, how many pins can one man make in a day? Well, he says here in this particular paragraph that they can barely make one. If they had all wrought, which is a very old English word, just meaning make, but if they all wrought separately and independently, and without any of them having been educated to this peculiar business, they certainly could not each of them have made 20, perhaps not 1 pin in a day. So not 1 pin in a day if each of these people had just completely dedicated themselves to making just 1 pin. And pins here, we're talking about like a needle pin, something that you would use for sewing. So that's still it's a really small item here that Adam Smith is describing. And that's why he's chosen a pin, because you would think that that would be so easy that one person can certainly make at least 1 pin in a day. The reason why he can't make so many pins in a day is because of the time it takes to go from one step to another. Getting out the metal, rolling it out, grinding it down, taking a break for lunch, like all of these things, the time in between those steps adds up so that you end up losing a lot of time. But if you're doing nothing but, say, the grinding of pins all day long, you could certainly complete that step a whole lot faster because there's not so many transitions. There's not so much time given between each step. And the second question is how many pins can a group of people who were engaged in what Adam Smith describes as distinct operations make in a day? Well, they can make about 12 pounds of pins in a day. And in a pound, there's upwards of 4,000 pins of middling size. 4,000 times 12 pounds is going to be 48,000 pins in a day, which is obviously a lot more than just one. So this is, from Adam Smith's perspective, this is seen as just an ostensible, unquestioned good, because now we're able to reach greater and greater degrees of efficiency. And with that efficiency, we're going to be able to radically drive down prices. And those things are good both for consumers, i.e., that rising number of middle class consumers, shoppers, citizens in Britain who, because of other, in tandem benefits of the Industrial Revolution, now have more money in their pockets in order to pay for goods. Now, jumping ahead to the last question here, the efficiency ends up costing a lot of people their jobs, and is it worth it? And this is still a question that we have here today. So I would go ahead and pause the video and answer this particular question here, because this is just where you are grappling with some of the ramifications and the consequences of the changes that are taking place here during the Industrial Revolution. Well, I have here a petition from the woolen workers in Leeds in 1786. And these woolen workers are the people that previously made woolen garments in accordance with, say, like the guild system. So this is kind of the old way of producing clothing. And they're issuing a petition to the powers that be in the city of Leeds, and they're going to give them one particular request here. So I'll go ahead and read this in an English accent. Leeds, everybody, is a city in northern England and was a center of the textile trade. To the merchants, clothiers, and all such as wish well to the staple manufactory of this nation, the humble address and petition of thousands who labor in the cloth manufactory showeth that the scribbling machines have thrown thousands of your petitioners out of employ, whereby they are brought into great distress, and are not able to procure a maintenance for their families, and deprive them of the opportunity of bringing up their children to labor. We have therefore to request that prejudice and self-interest may be laid aside, and that you may pay that attention to the following facts which the nature of the case requires. The number of scribbling machines extending about 17 miles southwest of Leeds exceed all belief, being no less than 170, and as each machine will do as much work in 12 hours as 10 men can in that time do by hand, speaking within bounds, and they working night and day, one machine will do as much work in one day as would otherwise employ 20 men. As we do not mean to assert anything but that what we can prove to be true, we allow 4 men to be employed at each machine 12 hours, working day and night, will take 8 men in 24 hours, so that upon a moderate computation 12 men are thrown out of employ for every single machine used in scribbling. And as it may be supposed, the number of machines in all the other quarters together to equal nearly those in the southwest, 4,000 men are left. Oh, to shift for a living, how can they? And most, of course, fall to the parish if not timely relieved. The word parish there refers to, say, the district overseen by the local Anglican church. The parish is an administrative district overseen by, say, a local vicar and then a bishop. So basically what he's saying there is must, of course, fall to the local church to take care of them and their families. Allowing one boy to be bound apprentice from each family out of work, 8,000 hands are deprived of the opportunity of getting a livelihood. We therefore hope that the feelings of humanity will lead those who have it in their power to prevent the use of those machines, to give every discouragement they can to what has a tendency so prejudicial to their fellow creatures. You can go ahead and pause the video if you'd like and answer the questions in your packet. You can also let the video play, which will run for about 30 seconds until the next document picks up. Our third document is entitled The Life of a British Textile Worker. And I have some background information here about this particular text. So Michael Sadleir was born in Derbyshire, England in 1780, and he was a member of Parliament. That's what this MP stands for. A member of Parliament in the House of Commons, which is the equivalent of, say, the House of Representatives in America. The House of Commons is the lower house of Parliament, but it'll end up becoming eclipsing the House of Lords as Britain's middle class rises in number and in wealth during the late 1700s, the 1800s, and into the 1900s. I mean, the House of Commons dominance is all but assured by the early 1800s. So during that time, Sadleir conducted a parliamentary inquiry on the conditions of laborers in British factories. And this text contains just a sample series of those interviews before the committee. And just so you don't have to listen to my voice as I go back and forth between Mr. Matthew Crabtree, who is a worker at a textile mill, and Mr. Sadleir, member of Parliament, go ahead and pause the video and read over this particular text here. Our questions are as follows. What age did Mr. Crabtree begin work in a factory? What were his hours? And how was discipline maintained in the factory? Keeping in mind that he's very young when he first goes to work at this particular establishment. Take a moment, pause the video, and then answer these questions, and then pick the video back up to finish up today's lecture. Our last question for this entire document here is, why did these things happen in the Industrial Revolution? This is another opinion-based question. It's an argument-based question. So go ahead, pause the video, take a few moments to answer it. The long-running answer that I would provide for this question here, and this is one that I've given time and again when we've encountered things in medieval and modern history that have been very unsettling, acts of great cruelty and selfishness, irrationality, malice, passions, the like. Human nature is flawed and selfish, and that people have a tendency to look out for their own interests rather than the needs of others. And education like the kind that you all are getting here at Thales Academy is really meant to try to temper the flaws in human nature so that you guys are more concerned about the needs of others and more empathetic, as well as more industrious, so that you're working hard in order to contribute meaningfully to the world around you and really seek to change it. Because a lot of times, like, for instance, in the Industrial Revolution, efficiency, greater productive capacity, these things aren't going to change human nature. And in fact, if they're pursued outside of the bounds of like a good, wholesome education that really stresses good character, I mean, really, a lot of this efficiency and this power may just make some of those flaws in human nature just that much worse. All right, so here's just a rundown of all the benefits and problems in the Industrial Revolution. Well, students, that brings us to the end of this particular video. Thank you guys so much for reading through these documents. Be sure to finish answering those questions either on a hard copy, in a PDF, or in a Google Docs document and upload it back into Canvas. As always, thank you guys so much, and stay classy, stay classical.